Let me put in the
Welcome, everybody, to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight, we'll be covering The Art of War, Chapter 8, and we will have two readings, and then we will go to Jason's translation. So do I have any volunteers to do the reading? James, thank you.
Double apologies. Sun Tzu said, in war, the general receives his commands from the sovereign, collects his army, and concentrates his forces. When in difficult country, do not encamp. In country where high roads intersect, join hands with your allies. Do not linger in dangerously isolated positions. In hemmed-in situations, you might resort to stratagem. In a desperate position, you must fight. There are roads which must not be followed, armies which must not be attacked, towns which must not be besieged, positions which must not be contested, commands of the sovereign which must not be obeyed. The general who thoroughly understands the advantages that accompany variation of tactics knows how to handle his troops. The general who does not understand these may be well acquainted with the configuration of the country, yet he will not be able to turn his knowledge to practical account. So, the student of war who is unversed in the art of varying his plans, even though he be acquainted with the 5 advantages. He will fail to make the best use of his men.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone else have a different translation? Aman, okay.
Unless anybody else has one, I have the Samuel Griffith translation.
I can read mine if you don't mind. No, I mean,
Go right ahead.
Let me try this one. I found this one in airport. Okay, when I travel. Okay, so $10 is just so pocketbook, so you can put in the pocket in the air when you're waiting for the airplane. You can read. So. Okay, so I'm going to read, okay, chapter 8. All right, let me see. Okay. The general rule for military operations is that the military leadership receives the order from the civilian leadership to gather armies. That there will be no encampment on difficult terrain. That diplomatic relation be established at borders. Do not stay in barren or isolated territory. When on surrounded ground, plot. When on deadly ground, fight. There are routes not to be followed, armies not to be attacked, citadels not to be besieged, territory not to be fought over, orders of a civilian government not to be obeyed. Therefore, generals who know all possible adaptations to take advantage of the ground know how to use military forces. If generals do not know how to adapt advantages, even if they know the lay of the land, they cannot take advantage of it. If they rule armies without knowing the art of complete adaptivities, even if they know what there is to gain, they cannot get people to work for them. Okay. Okay, so today's chapter 8, since it's a little bit, I think it's much shorter in my opinion. So I probably will, okay, so allow me to, so probably that's a good chance. And this is the chapter 8 out of 13. That probably is a good time to kind of do a review from chapter 1. So I'll probably take about 2-3 minutes to review. So right now we are in chapter 8. So chapter 1 talking about the plan, and the Sun Tzu talk about 5 things for the prince. That I will assume the audience talking about the Tao, the heaven, the earth, the general, and the method. That's the 5 elements, 5 things you need to remember. Second thing, the chapter 2, Sun Tzu is talking about waging war, but actually it's not waging the war yet. It's just in the planning stage. He talked about the money, how much money you will spend, and then how much money you need to burn during the war. So you need to shorten your time of war. Then chapter 3, the title is Stratagem to Attack. But basically, he's talking about the stratagem, strategize to attack, not to attack yet. So he talk about keyword is know thyself, know thy enemy. So know yourself, know the other side. That's the way to win. Chapter 4 start to talk about the formation, and which Sun Tzu want to talk about is to defense, the concept of defense. Make sure you are undefeatable, so you can be in a safe situation. So that finished the first 4 chapters, then gradually move to the battlefield. Okay, so chapter 5 start to bring the concept of 势, which will translate roughly as situation, configuration, power, potential, energy, this kind of word called 势. And the basics, they use water metaphor, like water flow, okay? Then chapter 6 start to talk about what is virtual, what is real, because we all deal with incomplete information. So we cannot know everything 100%. So we need to play some pretense. So a lot of things you are unknown. So the Sun Tzu talk about, he used the water metaphor. Okay, like water, you should avoid the strong, attack the weak. That's Sun Tzu's idea. Then chapter 7, which we deal with last week. Okay, so basics is talking about to form the army under the command from the prince, gathering all the people, and then he bring up the concept, 2 major concepts. One is talking about the qi, right, the military, and we can translate as the spirit. And then Sun Tzu give a lot of metaphor, right, how to, like, let me see, move like a wind, right? Gentle like the forest, all this kind of thing, unmovable like a mountain. So what kind of military movement you need to do? That's last week. So this week, we start to talk about the variation, okay? So you can feel, if you go through from the previous 7 chapters, you will see from the high level going down to the today, chapter 8 is for sure is in the battlefield. Like last week, Sun Tzu already talked about 2 armies face each other. Okay, so look at the title. I translate word by word, is so-called the 9 variations. So some translation call it the adaptation, adaptivities. Okay, so the word 9 is strange today for me now, because in ancient Chinese, 9 usually means many, okay, or a lot of number, okay, so many variation or just a variation. So that's a good number to use. 9 is a number, ancient Chinese. Even today, people like to use, that's a good number. But here, does that mean exactly 9 different variations? It could be, because I counted, you have 9. And if you read the translation, in this paragraph, Sun Tzu talk about 5 advantages. And actually, if I counted, Sun Tzu list 5 advantages of the land and 4 not to do list. Okay, so the total is 9. So when the title called 9 variations, could means exactly 9. So I'm going to list 9 here. So that's the point. So I'm going to read my translation. Master Sun said, in the military operation, the general acts under the order from the prince and forms the army by assembling the people. So here, because Chinese word doesn't have a plural or singular, so I decided to use singular under the order. Okay, I will explain later. So assembly, so here Sun Tzu give 9 advice, which contains 5 advantages of the land and 4 not to do. Okay, so do not garrison on destroyed land, form alliance on open land, do not stay on isolated land, strategize on encircled land, fight on desperate land. So here's the 5 things about land. Then here comes 4 not to do, something not to do. So some roads do not pass, some armies do not attack, some towns do not besiege, some lands do not strive for. So total is 9. Then come with the last one. Okay, I need some interpretation. Some commands from the prince do not follow. Okay, so if you look at this one, it could be contradict from the first one, right? At the beginning it said, and the same as in the previous chapter, the same as chapter 7. In the military operation, the general acts under the order from the prince. And here it said, some commands, some orders from the prince not to follow. So that's why here in Chinese, it all use the word means command or order. They are the same word. But I will, at this moment, I will put the first one as singular, the second one as plural, okay? So the idea is this. The general received the command. Actually, it's only one command. Go fight against country B or country A, this country, okay? So that's one command. The rest, the general only selectively receive, okay? Some commands, okay? So that means after that, after you go to the field, the general is not going to accept all the commands from the prince, okay? So I think that's the key here. And then that's why the first one I will translate as the order. And the rest, the second one I translate some commands from the prince do not follow. So second part, therefore, the general who thoroughly understands the advantages of 9 variations knows military operation. The general who does not thoroughly understand the advantages of 9 variations, even though he may be familiar with the configuration of the land, fails to take the advantage of the land. The general who rules the army without knowing the art of 9 variations, even though he may be familiar with the 5 advantages of the land, fail to make the best use of the man, okay, of his men. So the last paragraph, this part, I've listed as ABC. Sounds a little bit lengthy, but we need to forgive Sun Tzu because he doesn't know logic, doesn't know Aristotelian syllogism, because if you know, they will be much easier because the idea is very simple. You need to know the land, and he called the 5 advantages of the land. If you don't know, even you familiar with the land, you cannot best use of your people. That's the simple logic. But since Sun Tzu has not been trained in logic, so he has to put a little bit lengthy way. That's the key. Yeah, thank you. And Amang, please.
Thank you, Jason. And thank you for both retaining the alternate that I offer and the explanation for why singular, why plural. Acting under orders was just more colloquially what you'll hear in military parlance, but I understand the logic in making sure one is singular and one is plural. I wanted to take advantage, since we did that quick overview, to offer an interpretation of sort of the reason or logic that may be involved here. One of the things that I haven't leaned into very much, but I think I've mentioned once or twice, is that this is a text with a pedagogical agenda. In other words, it's a text designed to teach someone the art of war, to teach them how to be a better actor in terms of military performance. And I do believe there are many layers to the lessons being offered here. But as you can probably tell from the last chapter and this chapter, this feels very much less like lessons being offered to a general, to a prince, to someone who would be at the head of a household. There's almost something intentionally daunting in Sun Tzu's use of numbers and logistics. And that is, I can almost envision handing this text to a prince who reads through the first chapter, maybe makes their way into the second chapter. By the third chapter, they're losing interest and starting to get just overwhelmed with the details and logistics. And by chapter 4, the expectation is they just hand it to a general they trust and say, here, you study this and you tell me what's important. And then the lessons on the particulars of battle start being divulged. It's meant to be sort of an exhausting and daunting curriculum. You have a great deal to learn to be proficient at this. You have a great deal to understand to be versed in the art of war. And I think the subtext is, to any princeling, you aren't qualified. You just aren't qualified. If you think of all the things that you must do in your position, knowing and understanding and being adept at absolutely all of this is not in your purview. You need someone who you can trust, who can be versed and adapt and knowledgeable in all of this. And so as I've read through this translation and worked with Jason on doing the translation, I'm coming to see that there is an intentional sort of blockade or pushback for the prince to be the intended audience. They should read this just to familiarize themselves with, there's a whole lot you don't know that you don't know. And now that you've read this, you know that there's a whole lot you don't know. So hire somebody who knows it and knows it very well. And here in chapter 8, we start getting into those nuanced, nitty-gritty details that probably require some context for somebody to understand. If you say, don't garrison on destroyed land, a prince would be like, why is this a bad thing? A general who has done it would say, oh yeah, I can tell you exactly why that's a bad thing. I get this piece of advice. Been there, made to do it. It's horrible. Never do it to my soldiers. So I just wanted to offer that up as sort of the overview of where we are now into the weeds of battle, as it were. And Yeah, I'm excited to hear your takes on this particular verse.
So folks, go ahead and line up to share your thoughts on verse 1 in chapter 8. So first up, we have David.
Yeah, maybe it's just a slight veer at this moment, but from what was saying, there is a risk as the prince to handing power over to the military,
Right.
because in as much as they're successful, they can also command that power, which if you're not really the one determining it, I mean, there are times when the prince leader actually had to take over control of the army in Chinese history, right? So you can confirm that. Second thing is about the multiple commands, the commands from the leadership. It's sort of, maybe it's not a big deal. I mean, you get your order to engage in this process, sort of the strategic goal. But it says down below, there are orders not to follow. So there are some specific orders, more than one, that are being entailed, that are being issued, right? And this is saying, without determining how, it's telling us there is a primary strategic goal and there are other things, right? So you may want to address that for me. Thanks.
Any comments, either Jason or Ahmad?
Yeah, I can comment this one. Well, in general, I think this word, in Chinese called 君命有所不受. Okay, it's some command from the prince do not follow. It becomes a saying through the history. Okay, whenever the general refuse to take the order from the prince, from the sovereign, they will quote this word. Okay, doesn't matter as good intention or bad intention. A lot of times it's bad intention because that's his power. Okay, so I think that's not moral teaching here. It's just show you the history here. And I'm not the political expert. I'm not the military expert. And then I'm more interested in the philosophy. So I just show this one is a fine line, this one. And I'd like to share a famous story. And during the warring state, there's a famous general. His name is Bai Qi. Okay, so when the Qin is the state on the west, eventually they conquered all the other states. When Qin, the emperor, okay, asked Bai Qi to wage the military to conquer I think it's another powerful state. I think the state of Zhao, I'm not sure. But he takes about 1 million or 2 million a military force, which is 2/3 of the entire country. So when he go out, you can see this dangerous situation, right? 2/3 of the military power is in one man's hand. So that's a very dangerous situation. So when he the general out of the field, the emperor constantly sent messenger to ask what's the situation, what are you doing now, what's going on, and anything want to report. Okay, so every time the general send the message back to report, always say, oh, you told me you are going to give me a big land. Where's land? I haven't seen it. And next time say, oh, you told me you are going to promote my 2 sons to certain position. When are you going to do that? Okay, when can I increase my salary? So the assistant from the general tell him, come on, you are the chief, commander-in-chief. Why you make this kind of request? And he said, listen, I have 2/3 of military power. If the emperor have any suspect about my loyalty, not only we will lose the war, and I will lose my life. So only thing I can do is keep telling the general, keep telling the emperor, my boss, my interest is my family. I want to make more money. I want to have my son have a good life. Then we will be safe, and then we can win this war. So I think that's a good lesson on how to manage your manager. Okay, so I think that's a important message, and it a little bit sidetracked, but I think that's a good way, a chance to respond to what David is talking about.
I think Jason has an excellent answer. I only wanted to add a couple of things to it. One of the most classic Chinese novels, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, is entirely predicated on Liu Bai's refusal to follow his emperor's order most of the way through the book, because it ensures his death. And in fact, when he does finally follow the order, the empire falls apart. So it's meant as a parable or a lesson in some orders are not to be followed for a very real reason. And it's not always about morality. It can be just about the utilitarian good of all involved. But there is some sort of self-determination element that hinges on morality here, making this almost a proto-Nuremberg trial sort of directive. The I was just following orders is not good enough, at least not according to Sun Tzu.
Well, from what you said, it seems important that this book, which becomes a foundational way of evaluating leadership, itself declares that the general can override the commands. So it's part of the protocol. Like you said, it's built in. You have responsibility to make those decisions at a certain level. Cool.
Thank you, David. So it's Ian next.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to say two things. Firstly, that the two translations for the title are either variation or adaptation. I like adaptation more because it seems to suggest that it's a reaction to a situation compared to variation, which might be like a random thing. So I was wondering if variation in that sense is ever used by Sun Tzu at all in his book, like, you know, like randomizing stuff like guerrilla warfare or whatnot.
Thank you, Ian. When you talk about this, I kind of agree with you. Adaptation probably make more sense because I'm aware of these two words. Okay, when I'm picking between these two, at that time I'm thinking about variation because the Chinese word is 变. 变 means change, means variation. So I decided this one, but right now I kind of think about probably I should use adaptation. Okay, the reason is if you take this word 变 change as a verb, okay, and you put the subject as me, okay, if I say I change, right, that means adaptation. So if you put the subject as the land, okay, that means variation. The land has various situations, but you put the subject as me, Jason, the subject as a person, a general. That means I have to adapt to the land. So adaptation could make more sense. At least at this moment, I'm thinking this one. And that's show one of the challenge in deal with ancient Chinese because there's no subject. So you really have to see, to guess what the subject, to be. Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, and that led me to my question, which was, is there any sense of like pure variation in his book at all, or in any of his subsequent writings, where it's like, he just does random stuff? Does he ever employ that at all? Because like in the rules that you said, it's like don't garrison on destroyed lands. It's like it's a reaction to something, right? But does he ever do stuff randomly, like
guerrilla warfare? Are you?
Yeah, guerrilla, or like I don't know, like surprise tactics. Does he ever delve on those in any of the other chapters?
I don't think so. I don't know, Among or anybody.
I would say that there is a subtext, not a subtext, but yes, there is certainly not what we would think of as guerrilla warfare today, but there is the notion that you must out strategize and outsmart your enemy, and that you shouldn't present them with all of your force right up front for them to assess. You should give them something to observe that they leads them to a given impression, and then have something or a unit in reserve to actually make an attack. So there is this notion of, subterfuge being of absolute premium value in battle. He never just comes out and says, go out and wing it. I don't think Sun Tzu, I think Sun Tzu could not stomach that idea. But there is an idea of adaptability. And as Chris was kind enough to point out, the word bian shows up several times in the text under many different subjects, from to the weak points and strong points to maneuvering. It comes up in many of the different verses, but each of them have their own unique context.
But doesn't he talk about surprise moves in the sense of keep unexpected things, always keep them jostled, and use small groups in ways to get around to their weak points and just keep them constantly flustered? So kind of.
Thank you, David. I think you are right. That's exactly I would like to say this one. And then also thank you, Ian. Let me think about things. I think this one you can see as a reaction. Sun Tzu writing this one as a react to the traditional war, right? The traditional, I think same as in Europe, right? During the American Independence War, we have the same situation. The British Army is using the traditional gentleman's game, where the red coat line up and then, one by one. Instead, versus America use a different way. Same as Sun Tzu's reaction, because before Sun Tzu's time, the war could be like aristocratic soldier, and they are all noble people. It's a gentleman's game. They form up very small scale. But during Sun Tzu's time, because the development, the economic development, and the scientific development, the tool of iron, so people, you can wage like millions of people. I don't know really have a million or not, but basically you can draft the regular people and have the mass army. And during this time, it's no more gentleman's game. So his writing could be a reaction to the traditional warfare.
Thank you for that explanation. Yes, I was actually also thinking about the use of smaller groups, but also the use of information as well is very important when we're thinking about this. Sun Tzu talks about essentially acting on good information using spies. So I think that's you're not necessarily going to act with in a more spontaneous way if you have advanced information about the enemy. So thank you for that, Ian. James.
Thank you. That's chapter 1. Basically, he says all war is by deception. Chapter 3 is all about strategies, including always wait for your opponent to not be ready. Whenever your opponent is ready, that's the time to attack. So there's an awful lot of ideas of deceit and invoking strategy on the opponent if you read carefully in the early chapters. In this chapter, I really like the idea of the 8, the 9, which turns out to be 10 recommendations. Sun Tzu has a lot of that kind of advice that we shouldn't actually end up being the ones that don't look out for opportunities, the ones that fight from a disadvantage because we're not thinking ahead of the enemy. And this is the idea, the modern word for that is guerrilla warfare, like even talks about flanking the enemy troops so as to give them problems, that would be flanking the enemy would be so that's the easiest way to reduce their numbers. I like the form of this, the land kind of idea, and then the four do nots afterwards are kind of all objects. I notice roads. Some roads don't. Some armies don't. Some towns don't. Some lands don't. In other words, be discreet. Use discretion, as you say. And this also goes for a prince who is micromanaging. He's not saying disobey all the orders from the sovereign or anything like that. He's just saying, look out in case you've been micromanaged, or maybe the prince and you worked out a plan together, and your plan was to do this: go into the town, go down to the field, try to gain dominance in the hills or something like that, right? And then when you were actually in situation, you knew what you needed to do. And it was not necessarily according to the plans that had been made beforehand, either by the prince or, by a committee in conjunction. Or by a military committee in conjunction. So now the general is in charge, and the general has to make the ultimate decisions of what to do and what not to do. So that's so I think that's what this section is about. The intelligence of the general, the fine tuning of the decisions of the general. So yeah, so another great idea from Sun Tzu.
And thank you for that, James. I think that's a very important point. Sometimes the most important thing is to know what not to do. And I think that there's a lot of times in any situation that we can think about, we could apply that to, I keep coming back to some types of business ideas, but having, there's certain rules where you just don't necessarily get outside of your area of expertise, instead of growing organically sometimes. So anyway, thank you for that. Anne.
Yeah, I'm starting to think, and I don't know if others would agree, that the notion of the prince as the intended audience was put forth, and I'm just really starting to instead see this text as being sort of a training manual for upper level officers. I think that the prince, I think even back in chapter 1, I can't quote it, but that the prince is sort of asserted as a textual, sort of a respectful nod. But I think eventually, almost immediately, we're talking about the people who are really on the ground. The earth plays a big role, as we know throughout the text. It's a theme in terms of high ground, low ground, cities, and so on and so forth. So I think this, unless somebody else can provide, an alternate opinion and point to some evidence, I think this is actually not even intended to be read by the prince at all.
Sorry, and let me respond to your question, and I'm going to provide evidence on chapter 1. Okay, if you read the chapter 1 and then on the paragraph 4, he talk about 7 comparisons, something like so. The Sun Tzu said, appointing the general who follow my plan leads to victory. Retain him. appointing the general who doesn't follow my plan leads to defeat, dismiss him. So I have to assume, okay, that's who is the boss of the general. It must be the prince, right? And then in this chapter 8, he said, some command from the prince do not follow. So the audience could not be the prince, it must be the general. So that's why here, if you compare these two chapters, the audience must change. Otherwise, we will say you conflict yourself. So, that's my evidence. Thank you.
Okay, so appointing the commander, repeat the quote from the text, Jason, please.
Okay, that's my translation. Okay, so the last two words, okay, is appointing the general who follows my plan leads to victory. Okay, retain him.
Well, my understanding is Sun Tzu, the master, is a general.
Well,
But, so he's
he is.
The master said, appointing my, and so then in that case, he's become schizophrenic and he attains to be the Lord, the emperor,
I think you make a very good point, but I have no answer on that because some, definitely, if I'm the prince, I say, okay, shut up, okay, you are fired, okay. So that's a way to do it. But I will assume during that time, because people are fighting, the princes, okay, different country, different state are fighting for talent. So for the talent, if they recognize the prince will listen. So I will assume when Sun Tzu speaks of this word, he doesn't put himself as the general or the general in the battlefield. He's talking about the chief advisor to his role is the chief advisor, chief military advisor to the prince. Okay, and he could be appointed as a general later on. I don't know, but I have to assume that's his position.
Thank you for that, Jason Kwan.
I wanted to make another comment, but this question of the prince interests me very much. So I would like to add something about that. Let's not forget that historically, Sun Tzu gave this treatise to a prince called King He Lu of the Wu Principality or even the Wu Kingdom. So he has been introduced to that King He Lu of the Wu Kingdom, corresponding more or less to the Jiangsu province nowadays, a part of Zhejiang and part of Jiangsu province. And his friend Wu Zixu presented him to that king. And that king has been impressed by his book and used his book as a base to conquer the kingdom of Chu to the west of the Wu Kingdom. Okay. So that is the historical proof that it has been written first and foremost for the prince. And for the comment about the fact that why the phrase that the general in a special situation should not listen to the prince cannot be addressed to the king or the prince. Well, I beg to differ because I think that a king or sovereign would be wise to be informed that sometimes his military leaders would not listen to him. So I think it's not so absurd than that to have that kind of phrase in a book destined for a sovereign.
That would be called mutual deniability.
Wow. That would be, well, first, I would like to say that that book has been written for the ruling class of ancient China, okay? And within that ruling class, you have the sovereigns, you have the lords, you have the generals, but let's not forget it was hereditary aristocracy. So those people were in the same family or they were cousins, okay? So even if some of them were at the apex and others were at the middle, they more or less the same universe. So most of them, those who had ambitions and talents and intelligence would read the same books independently of their exact position at a certain time. After all, some very humble cousins, because they were clever enough, managed to get the throne. So it's in the same universe of aristocrats anyway. The other thing that I wanted to say is about the word the 九变. Okay, 九变, 九, nine variations or 9 tactics. 9 in Chinese can mean 9, the number 9, or can mean many. Okay, so it is certain that it can be translated as adaptations. I'm absolutely in agreement with that. However, if you count the number of stuff that Sun Tzu recommended not to do, they are exactly 9 too. So it can be translated as 9 variations. It would not be a big mistake for me, in the sense that there are 9 specific situations that the general need to give his attention to if he doesn't want to fall into the typical traps, if you want. And maybe another word that could be interesting as a substitute for adaptation, which is a very good translation, adaptation, but it could be transformation too. It's in the sense that you have to transform yourself in your mind and in your behavior according to the movement or the subterfuges of the enemy. So anyway, adaptations is very good, of course. I finish here.
Thank you, Juan. Carl, you had your hand up a couple times. Do you want to share anything?
My thoughts keep racing. Thank you. No, I do like the term adaptation, and then Quan's point actually of transformation. I think these are sort of imperative for looking at how one thinks about warfare. And my book, same translation, but it has some commentary about how even the imperial wishes must be subordinate to military necessity. So going back to the earlier chapters about how you think about maneuvering and weak points and strong points and keeping your plans dark and impenetrable and such, is very much about how that is executed, which may go against commands from sovereigns that are not there in the field, etc. And that I think Quan's point about the hierarchy from aristocrats that can understand in theory what it says, but the actual practice of those that are in battle supersedes what somebody may decide from afar. That's all.
All right. I also think about the means of communication at this time. So I'm going to ask the next 3 people to be very brief with the comments because it's 8:57 and we're only getting on to verse number 2. So please just be very brief and go ahead, James.
I just wanted to mention that this book is a one of a kind. It's not, I mean, I know there's a 19th century book that's pretty important for the military, but the time this was written, this was a revolution. This is a revolutionary book. This is I really doubt that the level of Chinese understanding of warfare preceded Sun Tzu. I think he basically was encapsulating his own expertise as a seasoned leader and as a person who dedicated himself to the understanding of strategy and tactics of warfare in his study. So this book is basically unparalleled. There were military accomplishments that came by the Greeks, starting with the Greeks and Romans. Yeah, there were some really interesting things that happened there, and a lot of smaller things that happened in other societies. But this, I'm thinking of Alexander the Great. But this is for the time it occurred. This book was written. This is unparalleled. So I just wanted to emphasize that this is not ordinary chatting about how did the battle go or stuff like that. This is the essential wisdom on warfare.
I agree with that. Thank you, James. Then we have Johnny, then followed by Ann, and then we'll be moving on to number 2.
You have to pardon me. I'm in my art studio. So this is, and then I'm in art school. So anyway, so kind of messy back here. I used to work with UPS and management, and the awesome part of my life. one thing I learned in their management was there were managers who did exactly what they wanted, which which worked fine when there weren't a lot of problems. But when there were problems, it was the managers, it was the employees who were trying to achieve the goal, but had to do it differently than they were told to do. Those were the people you could count on, because the manager, the general manager would not be in the building asleep. And it was those managers everyone looked to who could make the goal happen, and even better, who found a way to do it that perhaps was not by the book, but legal, not the way we were ordered to do it, but we had to find ways to make those numbers work. And the ones who followed the orders, but the numbers didn't work, they were out of there. The ones who could judge the situation and act and achieve the numbers and the management that was needed, those people rose up. Those are the people who knew what the people above them wanted. And even when they were given orders, underneath all that, they understood why the orders were there, and they had to achieve the order, but they had an overall look of everything as well. They could be trusted to make those decisions. Those are the ones who rose higher. Those are the ones who eventually would make the higher choices and it go down. That's how you grew in the ranks. Okay, that's all I got. Thanks.
Very much. Thank you. Appreciate that comment. Anne, please.
Yeah, I like the variation word because it suggests in some biological sense an emergent and various situation. Adaptation to me suggests a static moment, a static moment relative to the earth, like you can just pin it down and suddenly you can adapt to the new situation. I don't think that's what's suggested in the text. There are lots of suggestions, again, of the earth and what have you. Anyway, thanks.
Very good point, actually. I like that, especially when you're talking about terrain.
Yeah, emergent and generative. Generative are the two words that, sorry about that.
That's a very, very good point. I appreciate that a great deal. So next we'll go to verse 2. And we will lead with, if you'd be so kind, James. Or if you don't mind.
Sorry about that. Hence, in the wise leader's plans, considerations of advantage and disadvantage will be blended together. If our expectation of advantage be tempered in this way, we may succeed in accomplishing the essential part of our schemes. If, on the other hand, in the midst of difficulties, we are always ready to seize an advantage, we may extricate ourselves from misfortune. Reduce the hostile chiefs by inflicting damage on them. Make trouble for them and keep them constantly engaged. Hold out specious allurements and make them rush to any given point.
Thank you, James. So next up would be either Jason or Armand. Martin or Jason, do you want to?
I can certainly read the Griffith if you like. Did you want to read yours? Oh, okay. Let me see. Finding place is always tricky.
Especially
and for this, yeah, and he starts off the section with and for this reason, the wise general in his deliberations must consider both favorable and unfavorable factors. By taking into account the favorable factors, he makes his plan feasible. By taking into account the unfavorable, he may resolve the difficulties. He who intimidates his neighbors does so by inflicting injury upon them. He wearies them by keeping them constantly occupied and makes them rush about by offering them ostensible advantage. I
Thank you for that.
think that's it. Yeah.
Jason.
Yeah, the rest are very short. So, okay, just 1 minute.
It's good because we spent an hour on the first one.
Yeah, it's because I follow the C text. So like the past three only have one sentence. So, okay. So I think it's very difficult to translate on this paragraph, I have to say, but the reward is not that big because there probably not a lot of new lesson to learn from this. So most are just the wording. Okay. The challenge here, if you listen to different translation, you probably not sure what they mean in the first paragraph. The interesting word Sun Tzu used, he talked about 杂, which means mix up. The advantage, disadvantage. So I think the reason, I just have to impose my reason on that to make sure the whole sentence, paragraph makes sense. So the first one, therefore, the wise man's consideration are always blended with both advantages and disadvantages. Okay, and I have to put a parenthesis because I assume it's expecting disadvantage in this situation, right? In the advantageous situation, you have to expect the disadvantage, and in the disadvantageous situation, you have to seize the advantages. I think that's the Sun Tzu want to talk on this sentence. So the wise man's consideration are always blended with both advantages and disadvantages. In the advantageous situation, he can succeed in his accomplishment because he expected some disadvantages may come, right? In the disadvantageous situation, he can resolve his misfortune because he can seize the advantage, okay, opportunity. So I have assumed that's the situation to make sense, to make this sentence make sense. Okay. So therefore, so here use the word, use the 诸侯. I think Kwan will be happy because I use the word feudal lords. I think that probably the suitable words, not something like a chieftain or something. So therefore, suppress feudal lords by inflicting damage on them. Use the feudal laws by making trouble for them. Entice feudal laws by providing perceived gains. Okay, because that's the situation during the warring state, and that the many feudal lords, or you want to call warlords, okay, they all competing for something, benefit for their own family or their own state. So when the country A fight against country B, they have other state, country C, D, E, F, G, H. They all surrounded to see what kind of opportunity they can take during this time. So Sun Tzu is talking about more diplomatic situation, right? So he used a few words in Chinese, very difficult to translate. First word is 驱, okay, 驱诸侯, okay. So you want to suppress some feudal lords, okay, by damage them. So don't come, otherwise you will something, right? E, okay, that's the words among probably different opinion, should be means enslave, but it would be very strange if you want to enslave other feudal lord. So I kind of call it use, or the feudal lords by making trouble for them. So cause some trouble, so you can drive other neighboring state to different situation. Third one, qu, I think amongst translation call it make them rush, right? So I kind of consider as entice or allure the feudal lords by providing some gains. So the second paragraph is talking about when you fighting against your enemy, they have other so-called neutral states, okay? You need to manage it because they are not really neutral. They have their own purpose in their mind. So three ways. One is suppress them, use them, okay, rush them, push them to some direction. I think that's Sun Tzu one. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that.
Again, I am always grateful when you keep some editorializing in there. And for anyone who didn't read it, use is actually very apropos for the term "e," but in this context, to use feudal lords sounds instrumental. And the context of what he's saying is to put them to use, to make them do your bidding, which is why I offered a very archaic word, "enserf," which is not quite the same as enslave. It's a little softer ball than that, but it does mean to put them into your service. And that was really the one sort of, I won't even say disagreement, but editorialized suggestion I offered. I think Jason's translation is excellent. I love suppress for Chu. I loved entice as an idea to make them, rush towards whatever they perceive as a gain. And yes, this is a pretty pithy verse, but it does feel like somebody was saying in the chat, kind of Morse codish. Expect disadvantages in the advantageous situation and succeed in accomplishments. Seize advantages in disadvantageous situations and resolve misfortunes. That does almost read like a double take. Wait, I'm sorry, what? What am I supposed to do again? I'm supposed to find advantage in the disadvantageous situation. I'm supposed to find the expected disadvantages in an advantageous situation. But this really is that old, expect for the unexpected, understand the fog of war. Don't mistake certainty with confidence, because you should be confident in your plan. You should be confident in your troops, in your training, but you should not be so certain of them as to misread the winds when they change on you.
Thank you, Aman. Very much appreciate that. Yeah, I also agree with this. Don't be overconfident. And in a way, I also get the obstacle is the way as well out of this passage as well. So Quan.
Maybe there's two verbs that are very simple that can be used to subjugate or to dominate. And I agree with everyone saying that this paragraph probably gives a very big lesson. Never be sure that you are winning, because there's always something unexpected. And when you think you're winning, maybe the fact that you can see some disadvantages can give you some moderation and avoid you the very grave mistake of hubris.
Yeah, and I'll tell you the one part that at least in the translation that I'm reading right now is that the essential part of our schemes, and I'm trying to parse out what essential actually means in that particular instance, because that's kind of critical. as far as understanding what the things, I mean, we've talked a little bit about what not to do in the previous passage, but what is the essence of what is being said here strategically is a little bit ambiguous to me. So with that, we'll go to David.
Yeah. I hope essential means that from the beginning of being given a command, you've understood what the ultimate purpose is, because that's the one thing you have to get. You can give up a lot of things along the way, but your flexibility can't give that part, right? So the thing I want to add to what was just said before, I think Kwan was talking, is just the way your advantage has to be looked at critically so that you see what disadvantages might be contained in it, because it could be a feint, it could be something which advances part of your goals but traps others in a way that you can't. You have to see the disadvantage. The other way goes too. It says here, it reflects that and says, look at your disadvantage, look at your desperation, look at where you're in a bad position. If you're open to all the possibilities there, you can find a way out. So even with your intelligence, you may not have all the intelligence until you're in the situation, but you have to keep flexible so that you're open to that open door. That's all.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarification, and I agree with you. The idea, the essential part of a scheme, needing your value, your purpose, your objective, whatever, however you wish to frame it, be clear, because then you actually, have a goal, so to speak.
But because Joe, this is weighing the advantages and disadvantages. At every step, you're looking for an advantage, but there may be a disadvantage on the way. But that overall one, that's the essence, right?
Exactly. And I think the other part about it, that's this kind of is in line with the rest of the text that we've been reading, in the sense that you're assessing your weaknesses and your strengths, right? Know your weaknesses and know your strengths, so that, within that you will be able to identify advantages and disadvantages, but not to overestimate your strengths in that process as well, is to be mindful of that. So James.
Yeah, I like the number 2, verse 2. The first one, it looks a little bit like a kind of like an interesting syllogism. There's like a couple of, it's like a blend these advantages and disadvantages, and then there's a tautology about advantages and a tautology about disadvantages. So I understand the difficulty in translating there. The second one, though, this idea of reducing or suppressing or usurping the feudal lords, that's perfect. I mean, that's you have to own them. If you come upon these feudal lords, inflict damage, make trouble, and on the other hand, you can entice them by providing advantages to them, right? That don't hurt your army, that aren't a problem for your project. So in other words, own them, to be the master, and because they were only feudal lords, they have small armies. So I think it's a beautiful line. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it also goes to two other points that we've been discussing throughout the text as well, is to be precise and to actually know who needs to be, for lack of a better term, suppressed or compromised. And so I think that leads into the idea of having intelligence as well. So, I mean, there's a lot of different parts of this that you can see kind of coming together. This is more just the tactical aspect of what we're talking about. We've been talking about it more strategically up until this point. I mean, well, that's not completely true. A couple chapters we've been talking about tactics, but nonetheless, I think that's a very important thing to consider, is the precision aspect, and to know who to hit. Michael.
Yeah, I think it's important in competition that you pay very close attention to your opponent's mindset when they are at disadvantage, because the tactics and mindset of the desperate are very, very different than the person that's in the lead. And that's how games get away, or a chess game, for example, can get away from somebody with a great advantage, is you just keep pressing your advantage, but you forget it's zero sum. So the loser is now becoming more and more desperate. They have no choice but to change their tactic. And if you forget that, you're no longer at an even footing, and you keep playing against them as if they're going to react normally. That's a grave, grave danger. Happens in a lot of sports. You have to just keep your opponent's mindset always at hand.
Very good point. Yeah, that's an excellent point. It reminds me of a scene, for those of you who have ever seen the second Godfather movie, where a rebel blows himself up, and Michael says, "Oh, well, you know, it tells me something," and he says, "It tells me that they can win." And because the rebel actually blew himself up, he was willing to die for the cause, and so that they were even more dangerous than the first estimated by the government at that particular moment in time. The general is escaping me, who was in charge prior to Castro. But I want to say Batista, something, I forget. Anyway, Anne, please.
Yeah, I have, you know, he enumerates in the translation that was read the idea of suppressing the enemy, and then, you know, and I can't remember the first two, but he chooses to leave as the third option something that's a little more soft, a softer strategy, tempt them with gain, you know. And the claim is that this or I at least heard the suggestion that this was like a negotiation thing, or a, you know, this is in the context of negotiating with elites. But anyway, I'm just curious about why he puts that as the in the text as the third option, and not instead the primary or first option. It seems to me there's some tension in the text as well. I have a different translation, so mine is, I'm having a hard time marrying the two, but there's some tension in the text wherein, for example, I recall an earlier, more, I guess, emphatic statement that one ought not to, when one is in a good position, inflict as much damage as possible on the enemy. You know, anyway, I'm wondering if anybody has any comments about that, or do they sense the same, have the same curiosity as I do about how those relate? Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, and let me respond to this one, not by a different translation, by what I read in Chinese this way. Okay, I see these three, they lay out from the most harsh to soft. Okay, and I don't see the means, the importance bit of these three. The way I read it is these three are equal important. All right, that's the way I read it. And what's the reason? I've been thinking about this for a long time. Okay, but I will talk about at the end of today's section. But I see the format of the three verses are identical. All right, and Sun Tzu didn't put the 1, 2, 3. And the format, if you read it in Chinese, let me show. Let me show for a second. You will see the format are identical. Okay, these three advice, the format are identical. I didn't put the number on that. That's 以害、以业、 以利, right? They're all identical. The first three words, 驱诸侯, 易诸侯, they only change the first word and the last word. The rest are the same. Only change the first word and the last word in Chinese. Okay, so that's how they lay out this one, and I don't see the perfect pattern. Okay, just like a formula. Okay, x and y, and x1 is y1, and x2 y2, x3 y3. Okay, that's it. Okay, so for this reason, I believe it's equally important.
I
I see
wanted
that-
to add something real quick, which I think may help Anne. When Sun Tzu was talking about always leave an enemy a route for retreat, he's talking about an enemy in battle. These are suggestions for dealing with feudal lords, and he makes that distinction clear. And you have to treat the two very differently. Otherwise, you may invite another battle that you don't intend to have.
A very good comment. Thank you. Anne, do you have any? Okay. So
Yeah,
go
I
ahead.
do have, and I is that also, Jason, I heard you pronounce some of the phrases. Are they poetic as well? Do they rhyme?
No, they don't rhyme. Okay, I don't
How about
see. I don't see Sun Tzu write this one as a poetry. Okay, I think, but I will talk about it later because I've been translating because that's the way to convince people. The ancient Chinese writer take the advantage of monotone of Chinese. Okay, boom, 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 boom. So they set up in the same tempo. Okay, and then kind of like push to your mind, nail to your mind, and then you're like, okay, I got it. But
Well, I did hear in the middle phrases, I heard similar sounds in those phrases in the middle, not at the ends, but in the middle, what you were reading.
Because they are the same words. They are exactly the same. Only the first word and the last words are different. Okay, just like a formula. Okay, you put the x1, it become y1, x2 become y2. That's it. Nothing changed. Okay.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, we'll move on to Mark.
Thanks, Joseph. I was just wondering about the concept of the blending together of the advantage and the disadvantage. And I think, Jason, you may have used the word mixing, because I was wondering how intimately linked together are these things? You know, if we're thinking in a sort of Hegelian way, we know that things contain their opposite or become their opposites in some ways. The essences are related. So when David S. was speaking, and David, you said the advantage in the disadvantage, that kind of reinforced, are these things so intimately linked? Or is one thing an advantage and another thing is a disadvantage? It's not like there's a disadvantage in the advantage in a Hegelian sense. That's what I'm wondering how people are reading this.
I'll let David answer for himself, but I think I have an idea what he's going to say.
Yeah, let me respond to this one. Of course, we know Sun Tzu never read Hegel. Okay, and I believe the reason I believe it's not a Hegelian sense because it's not synthetic. Because the words he used is very strange. Okay, it's 杂. Okay, the word 杂 means mess up or mix. Okay, he doesn't use other more Hegelian sense words like 茶 means make it clear. Okay, investigate. He didn't use this kind of possible Hegelian words. He used very non-Hegelian words, which is 杂 means mess up, mixed together. Okay, that's the Chinese word. That's why I will say no, it's not Hegelian sense of advantage and disadvantage. That's my response. Yeah.
You want to respond really quickly, Mark?
Yeah, I guess the reason I was thinking it possibly could be was if you are holding a position that might be an advantage, but if you do it too long, it might become a disadvantage. You know, does the same thing turn into its opposite? Or do you have an advantage and then as a result of something else, extraneous or external, a disadvantage may show up?
I have no, I think that's yeah, up to you to interpret. But I just look at my answer is basically look at the text without further thinking. I just look at the text, and that's what Sun Tzu is talking about. And you can have any kind of interpretation, but that's the word. I like to focus the word, because the word 杂, okay, means mess up, mix up, blended. It really bothered me in this case because it's very unusual in the text. Philosophical teaching text come with this word.
Just have a second question. When you put in the parenthetical expressions, expecting disadvantages and seizing advantages, were you just adding that, or is that in the Chinese, the original?
Okay, so yeah, I should be more precise on that, but because when I do the translation, I also learn it, right? So, okay, so there's a two possibilities. In this case, I put the princess is usually it means the text is not there, but I put there, okay, to make it clear. So, because like I said, a lot of Chinese, most of the ancient Chinese, there's no subject. So if I don't put the subject, it sounds very strange. Okay, so I have to put the subject on that to make it clear, to make it grammatically correct. Okay, so or sometimes make it the meaning complete. That's why I put the parentheses. Another time I put the parentheses, sometimes it's all or optional words. Okay, I should separate it. I was thinking about put the bracket for the optional word. Okay, and the parentheses as the words I put in. I probably will start to doing this. And then sometimes I put the blue text. That means that's Amon's suggestion, and I decide not take it. So I put a blue color over there. That's the convention I've been using. Okay.
So I just wanted to say in the rest of the English, you made it completely clear. The wise man is the subject of the second and third sentences, and nothing else. It's completely clear. It just makes it confusing, I think, when you add the parenthetical expressions.
Okay.
Because we already know we're mixing these two.
Okay, yeah, probably because I want to make it clear, but you, in your opinion, confuse you, right? Okay.
I'm going to put in a word for translational consistency. Parentheticals in a translation inevitably mean the translator's addition. That's pretty universally standard. So it's not as if it was invented for this. And it's been done since we started with the Tao Te Ching. Anytime there was a parenthetical, it's because it's an explainer, it's a clarifier, it's adding a subject that is omitted otherwise.
Thank you.
I really thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that
Yeah,
was
we
a
got to keep
distraction.
moving.
We went out of order for that and became a. I hope we remember what the original question I was going to address. What Ian said. It's sorry. What Mark said about the Hegelian question. I thought it was an interesting question. Where our translation that we're given was given advantage and disadvantage, which puts them in total opposition. So these are opposites. Now, whether that is a valid translation, that's up for you to tell us. But both of them do have something they have to share in common. Their motives in war, the things that make you move because you're going to use that, or move away from because you got to get away from it. These are things that are relevant to the success, the energy flow in the war. So these are necessarily in a dialogue with each other. For us to read this text, however, I agree with Jason, as a dialectic analysis of the concepts of advantage and disadvantage is a philosophical overlay that I don't think is here.
Right.
Yeah, okay,
I
thanks.
think that that's a fair assessment. Quan.
I think that in this paragraph, you have two very basic Chinese ideas. I want to begin with the end. The last 2 or 3 lines is about the basic ideas of legalism, okay? The principles and practices of statecraft and administration, to give a longer translation, or the art of the ruler. So you have to give rewards or punishment. So it's a very basic Chinese idea. The other very basic Chinese ideas is the yin yang thinking, okay? If you're in a situation where you think you're winning, there is a possibility of losing if you're too obsessed in your mind with your idea of winning. And but if in the situation where you think you are losing, and I insist on you think, okay, because always it's about the mind. Well, there is a possibility of winning if you are open-minded enough.
Thank you, Quan. Next, we'll go to Madeline. Then we'll go to.
Yes. Well, my general impression from this discussion, whether this is Hegelian or what it is, I was thinking it sounds more like the general is functioning as a pivot. In other words, he's the pivot between advantages and disadvantages. And so in that sense, he's like a mixing center where he's turning these two things around. And so I think the use of the word za, as Jason described it, it made me think of the Dantian, which is one of the places in the body where the different qi energies mix. And so in that sense, this sense of things being mixed together in a messy way could be related to that sense of the lower belly, where the general is acting on the battlefield, dealing with all these messy forces that are kind of thrown together and blending them, and then pivoting and turning things around.
Excellent comments. Thank you. Jason.
Yeah, 2 points I'd like to make. First, I really appreciate James tell me like one is a confusion and I had not heard before. Okay, or seminar, or this one make it not clear. That's very important to me because since we do the translation and then I present and really honest response, I think that's very important. So I will know what other people's mind. And then second thing is Kwang talk about the yin yang on the first sentence. I think that really makes sense. You know, I forget. And in this sense, za is correct. And then I also see some a paper. They link yin yang with Hegelian. Okay, so in this sense, it's a Hegelian sense that's also connected. So I think the yin yang probably the right interpretation. Okay, since he is a Chinese, not a Hegelian, so yin yang probably make more sense.
Thank you, Jason. We will go on to number 3, and the only thing I would recommend.
Probably we want to finish it, you know.
David, you have a very quick comment. Okay.
Jason,
very short.
could I just ask Jason before we move on, because you mentioned the relationship between yin yang and something which is Hegelian. In yin yang, you have the yin in yang, and you have the yang in yin, but they're not opposites, right? So
I will say yin yang is the opposite.
I think that one thing that's very important to keep under consideration here is we're talking about tactics, and that's different than talking about philosophical strategic approaches or principles. So there, when we're in the beginning, we're talking about principles. Now we're talking about how you're actually executing those tactics. And so that's slightly different when you start comparing yin yang or Hegel or anything like that. So anyway, that's my opinion. So let's move on from there. Or David, do you have one comment?
I'm volunteering to read number 3.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Let's finish number 3 and number 4. Because number 3
Yeah,
is
let's do 3 and 4 together.
All right. Wind it up short.
We can talk about Hegelian if you want.
Starting with 3, the art of war teaches us to rely not on the likelihood of the enemy's not coming, but on our own readiness to receive him, not on the chance of his not attacking, but rather on the fact that we have made our position unassailable. There are 5 dangerous faults which may affect a general. 1, recklessness, which leads to destruction. 2, cowardice, which leads to capture. 3, a hasty temper, which can be provoked by insults. 4, a delicacy of honor, which is sensitive to shame. 5, over solicitude for his men, which exposes him to worry and trouble. These are the 5 besetting sins of a general, ruinous to the conduct of war. When an army is overthrown and its leader slain, the cause will surely be found among these 5 dangerous faults. Let them be a subject of meditation.
Thank you, Dave. Would anybody else like to read? Thank you. I'm on.
Certainly. Since I'm reading to the end, it's not hard to find my place. It is a doctrine of war not to assume the enemy will not come, but rather to rely on one's readiness to meet him. Not to presume that he will not attack, but rather to make oneself invincible. There are 5 qualities which are dangerous in the character of a general. If reckless, he can be killed. If cowardly, captured. If quick-tempered, you can make a fool of him. If he has too delicate a sense of honor, you can calumniate him. Excuse me. If he is of a compassionate nature, you can harass him. Now, these 5 traits of character are serious faults in general, and in military operations are calamitous. The ruin of the army and the death of the general are inevitably results of these shortcomings. They must be deeply pondered.
Thank you, Amon. So Jason, we'll go to your translation now.
Okay, so this one. Okay, so number 3. Number 3, I think most of the translation are almost the same because we all copy each other. Guys make the perfect translation, I have to say. Okay, so thus the method of military operation is to rely not on the likelihood that they are not coming, but on our readiness to receive them. Okay. Not on the chance that they won't attack us, but on our situation of being unattackable. This one becomes a common saying in Chinese words. Okay, 无事起不来，事无有以待之. That's been a very common saying. And then Gaio made a very good translation. Is rely not on the likelihood that they are not coming, but on our readiness. On our readiness. Just 1 minute. On our readiness to receive them. I think that make a very good translation, and then so I have not much to explain on this one. Okay, and the next one. Thus, a general may commit 5 dangerous faults. Okay, determination to die, Okay, just for James, here I put a parenthesis. I should put bracket on that. Okay, that means that's optional words. And I try to translate word to word, and in the Chinese called 必死, okay, must die. So I translate it as determination to die. Okay, that means, you are ready to sacrifice. Okay, so determination to die, which leads to destruction. Determination to live, which leads to capture. A hasty temper, which leads to being insulted. Cherishing honor, which leads to being shamed. Love for all people, which leads to trouble. These 5 faults are the general's mistake. They cause disasters in military operations. When an army is overthrown and the general is killed, the causes must be among these 5 dangerous faults. It is a subject that must be examined. I think these words are very important. 不可不察也 is appear on the very first paragraph of the first chapter. It appears here, and you will see the same word show for the entire text. That means that's the subject you must study. 不可不 cannot not to do this. That means must. So you must know this subject. Okay, you will see this sentence again and again. Okay, so something I like to mention here is here it start to go to against the common moral sense, right? For example, love people. Okay, so it causes the problem, right? In the general, if you love all people, okay, you send the military, some people, some soldiers are going to die any war, okay, but if you want to love everyone, you want to save everybody, that's the problem, right? 廉洁, that means clean and incorruptible, okay? So that's also a good virtue. But this one also causes problem, right? Because you here is represent, I translate as honor, because in Chinese tradition, these 2 words means your honor. So sometimes you cannot achieve your goal because you are too clean. You are worried about your reputation too much. You cannot do it. So I think the Sun Tzu's text here is very practical here, right? He talked about you ready to sacrifice yourself. That's also the problem. You think about how to survive. That's also the problem, right? If you get angry easily, indignation, that's also a problem. Okay, you are too clean. You are thinking about your reputation. That's the problem. You have too much love. Okay, that's also the problem. Okay, so he put the general in a very practical way. Okay, that's all I have to say. Thank you, Amang. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I will normally reserve my comments towards the end, but because we're getting late, I want to give as much time as possible. But as much as I desperately want to, I have to address the Hegel thing. And I have to do it because Hegel and Schopenhauer were both in Prussia, professors at a university, and some of the earliest consumers of Eastern thought in the Western world, which, lo and behold, I can't tell you how gobsmacked I was the first time to read Schopenhauer and realize, oh, you just plagiarized Buddhism wholesale and misunderstood it. And there's not much difference in Hegel. As genius as he is claimed to be, there's a whole lot of pilfering from his dalliances with Eastern texts, particularly the I Ching and concepts like yin and yang, where we get dialectics from. But their plagiarism aside, because I would never accuse Buddha of sounding too much like Schopenhauer, it would just feel insincere. I want to talk about just briefly some of the overriding ideas of what is correct action. And I want to quote from King Fu Chai, who actually it's quoting, oh, what is his name? Sorry, I should have had this on hand, but I believe it's Qilin, or Cheng Yu, who's quoting King Fu Chai, who is reported to have said, when you see the correct course, act. Don't wait on orders. That was his directive in war. And the Kingdom of Wu was very successful in the early Warring States period. But this sums up what we were getting at before about the idea between deferring to authority versus taking action into your own hand. And when the king gives this directive to his general is then empowered to be able to say, okay, I don't have to sit around twiddling my thumbs waiting for the order. This is the correct course of action. Conversely, know that you are taking the correct course of action. If you're hemming and hawing, if you're on the fence, if you are plagued by any of those 5 foibles of a general, being overly covetous towards your life, overly covetous to a glorious death, overly covetous to honor, overly covetous to people, you are not going to be able to make an objective decision. And that's what each of those faults that he's talking about really stand for, is wanting something too much, wanting something more than the objective that you were sent out to do, which is to win a military affair or a military campaign, which needs to be your overriding mission, your overriding vision in action. A general might be lucky once on the battlefield, but a good general will continue to have those sort of results, which is the difference between accuracy in performance and precision in performance. Precision is accuracy repeated over time. Last but not least, we touched so briefly on the importance of spies. It's coming up. It's at the end of this, but it ties into this idea of the supremacy of good information. And there's a quote from Bill Gates that's a contemporary version that kind of captures Sun Tzu's sentiment on this. Gathering, controlling, managing information is the route to success in any endeavor against any opponent. That was his quote talking about Microsoft way back when against Apple. And even though Apple has been more than gloriously successful, you can't deny Microsoft is still up and running strong. And both of them are giving us pretty remarkable chat GPS or GPTs. Is it GPT or GPS? Chat GPT. Yeah, sorry. I should know this. I'm seeing enough papers from students written by them. And I want to thank everybody. It's absolutely wonderful to get a spirited conversation. I'm astonished we actually made it through all 4 chapters. I'm excited to hear your comments. And if I drop off, it's because my time's run out, but I'll look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thank you so much, Amon. So next up is David.
There you are. Sorry, toggling around. So I'm trying to clear this up in my mind, sort of separate these issues, because we've come up to this point recognizing the importance of intelligence and the correct use of information so that you can judge how to fool your enemy and how they're fooling you. And so the question of proper information and getting incorrect information and recognizance, not counting how many of their troops have been moved somewhere, or if they have better intel on you than you can tell about. Where is miscalculation and all of this thinking yourself too powerful or not knowing how it's really laid out? How is that thrown into these 5 questions, which are seeming to ignore all that and talk about sort of personality flaws? which is, if you're rushing in recklessly, this one translation, Jason's translation said you're determined to die. Does that mean externally looking at you, I can see it's determined you're going to die, or do you have a determination to go into battle and be, destroyed? That doesn't make sense. So the recklessness may have to do with your lack of information. So these 5 things don't talk about the information, which could be the general's weakness.
Yeah,
These are the character flaws, right? Or are we saying after the fact you lost, so you're rushing in at that point, which you thought was all the great, is actually was just reckless. This is supposed to help you predictively. It's no good if it's a retrospective of what happened, right?
That's true.
Sorry, I probably have to leave right at 8 o'clock or in 5 minutes. So let me respond to David quickly on this one. I would like to know, please let me know. I've been thinking about the Chinese word, 必死. Okay, the 2 words, must die. Okay, this word. Okay, so it's hard to translate. If I translate as word by word, that means must die. Okay, that sounds very strange. That's why I translate to determination to die. That means you are ready to die. Okay, if you see, that's also in Japan, right? Sometimes they put the white band here and write the 2 words, and that's must die. Okay, that's what they do it. Okay, you can search from the Google, you see the picture. Okay, that's must die.
Who must die? The enemy or you? What do you?
Which
one?
Me.
I must die.
I'm willing to die. Or you will say willing to die. Okay, so I mean, anytime I need my life, take it. Okay, that's the purpose. That's the word meaning. Okay, so please help me make it the words. I think the reckless is a good translation, but it doesn't reflect the word. Okay, so I hope you got the word, and I still struggling what would be the best way to translate this word. Okay, must die. It means I don't mind. Whenever necessary, I sacrifice my life. That's what it means. Okay, doesn't mean my enemy must die. It means me. Okay. So that's the thing. And the second thing about miscalculation, he didn't talk about this. Okay, I don't see any place in the later chapter he talked about miscalculation. Okay, but I know Sun Tzu is very focused on calculation. You need to calculate. Then let me defend for Sun Tzu text. I think the reason is most of people probably don't calculate because you deal with very incomplete information. So his suggestion is calculate. The more calculation you have, the more chance to win. That's the only thing he wants to say. Okay, and he doesn't say how about if you miscalculate? I don't think he talked about this, and why? I think calculation probably a new concept for him. So like in the emerge of information era, you don't talk about misinformation. Oh, this quite just say more information is better. I think that's.
I was hoping you were going to give the opposite answer and say that since he said up front that information is key, we're pulling all stops out to get information. So the only things left that can fail are you're too anxious to go in when you know the situation is perilous. You're not following my rules. You're reckless. Or you see that given the information, these 5 things made sense. But if you're not, at the end, to sum it up and say, those are the 5 reasons you lose, and check out the general, that didn't feel right. If he didn't have the right information, he may not have been reckless at all. He was just misled, Yeah,
I think that's fine. That's your opinion. But as I state many times, my job, read the text, reflect the text. Okay, I don't want try not to impose too much on that. But I'd like to point out before I leave, it's very important from the later chapter, and that's consistent with my view of he is for speaking to the general, because you will see the tone start to put more and more burden on the general. That's your fault. That must be fault. Okay, careful. And the next few chapters, you will see Sun Tzu's tone become severe. He talk about when you fail, that's the problem. It must be this problem. That's your responsibility. So I think his purpose is put the burden on the general. Okay, I think that.
Thanks, that makes sense.
If I can
Thank you. Yeah,
interrupt,
please. Yeah, please.
because like Jason, I'm going to have to go. But I think David's question was an important one, and it allows me to readdress something that was discussed before, going back to this, who's the audience? And I don't think it's an either or option. As I stated when we started, I think it's very possible that both the prince and the general are the target audience of this text. The idea being presented to the prince so that he understands both the expectations and that he is not qualified to actually make these calculations. And the prince in turn pass it on to his general to do this sort of calculating, because the whole text is a protracted argument against the miscalculation of engaging in war. When to do it, why to do it, what are the real reasons that somebody should undertake this, and what are the real costs. When you talk about the value of information, in the last chapter we'll get to spies, and the price tag he presents for how much you should pay spies is enough to make any Bao any false king sit up in their throne and say, what? That's an entire platoon. And his argument to this point is, yeah, it is. And it's worth it. And it's critical that you do this, because the type of warfare that you have been wedded to, the charioteer ceremonial warfare between warlords or princes, is antiquated. It's outdated when we're fielding these huge conscripted armies. Bravado and honor and going out, being the biggest man on the field is no longer enough. If you picture two charioteers riding at each other, the one who looks fiercer, it's like playing chicken in cars. You can spook the other person off the field, and then look, you just won the war. Rah, 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 look at me. That might work under those circumstances. With a fielded army of tens of thousands, the looks or the appearance, the facade of it, the shirt of it doesn't really matter as much as, the shoe of it. Is it substantial, or is it just fake and hollow? So I think all of those kind of tie together. Who are we talking to? Everyone involved in warfare from the top down. Who are we giving this advice to? Both the person who can give the orders and the person entrusted with the orders, and that you are entrusting, and how you should make that evaluation, not because they were the big man on the field, but because they've shown careful deliberation and understanding. That's it. I gotta run. I'll listen on for a bit, but thanks, and I'll see y'all next week.